Today's notes are titled Colonial America. So this is Unit 1, Notes number 2. So today we're going to be focusing on specific colonies, looking to see the motivations in how the colonies got founded, why the people came to these specific colonies, and then just kind of differences among our original colonies. So first, an English settlement at Jamestown. English colonies were originally funded and maintained by joint stock companies. So what this means is they were business ventures. So companies invested in these colonies. And so the idea was that the colony would make money. They would go to the colony, they would farm, they would crop, they might discover gold or other resources. So that was that kind of initial intention. So in 1601, King James granted a charter to the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company landed on the shores of Virginia in April of 1607, and they named their settlement Jamestown. And so you'll notice this trend with especially a lot of our earlier colonies of names reflecting the English kings or prominent figures within England at the time. The colonists had a difficult time adjusting to their new life of labor that many were not used to. So a lot of these colonists were merchants, businessmen, and they weren't the ones that did the hard work. But they're coming to these colonies. There is no food for them to eat. They have to farm the land if they want to eat. And so a lot of them didn't feel like that was their job. So if they didn't farm, food wasn't made. And so people began to die off. So many died because they could not handle these harsh conditions. So the colony was eventually able to stabilize and expand further along the James River. So they had more colonists coming, more resources, but it took them a long time to kind of find this balance. Jamestown, all the colonists almost died completely. They also discovered a highly profitable crop, tobacco. So here I have an image at the top showing kind of what these early colonists, how their lives would have been. And you see they would have had fences around to kind of keep a barrier between them and the Native Americans. They were living in, small little houses once they were able to get them built, but none of this was there. Everything was bare, and they had to build everything from the ground up. So it wasn't them coming to a city that already existed. They had to build things for themselves. Indentured servants. So in order to grow tobacco, the Virginia Company needed a key ingredient that was missing from the colony: field laborers. Many owners imported indentured servants from England. So indentured servants, if they're not slaves, okay, so indentured servants entered into this contract willingly. So in exchange for passage to North America and food and shelter upon arrival, an indentured servant agreed to a limited term of servitude, usually 4 to 7 years. And for that time, they belonged to their owner. But this, again, was a contract that they willingly entered. Indentured servants were usually from the lower classes of English society. So for them, they saw it as an opportunity to come to the New World. They would have to do work for several years, but once they were done, they were now in America and they could pursue their other opportunities. Okay, so for that time, they worked for their owner. They could not leave, or else that contract was broken. And then, but once they had a contract, and once their contract was done, they were free to go about their life. So different from slaves, because again, it was willingly done. But when we talk about the 13th Amendment bans or forbids slavery and indentured servitude. So settlers clashed with Native Americans. The leaders of Jamestown demanded tributes of corn and labor from local Native peoples, which they did not want to do. Their relationship was not good. They did not work with each other, hence the fencing around the colony. Soldiers pressed these demands by setting Powhatan villages on fire and kidnapping hostages and especially children. So, of course, the Powhatans began to fight back, and this led to more fighting between the two groups. So with the Jamestown settlers, their relations with the Native Americans initially were not good, but within this tribe, the Powhatan tribe, some of you may know this is the tribe that Pocahontas was from, and so they were eventually able to find what's the word I want to say? Common ground, find a way to work together. She eventually married an English settler and moved back to England, but not all relationships between the colonists and the Native Americans varied. So here, not good at first. We'll see from some of the other colonies, the relationships were a little bit better. So let's stop and think. So what motivated the colonists in Jamestown to come to America? So we talked about business ventures. They were kind of business motivated, wanting to make money, establish cash crops that are going to be profitable. So that was their initial kind of intention. So we see primarily coming over to Jamestown are businessmen, or men looking to make money. And then also, why did the colonists have such a hard time in Jamestown? You had the people coming over. Yes, they want to make money, but weren't necessarily willing to do the work necessary to establish a colony, farm, and do the necessary work. And then the conditions were also tough. It was different from what they were used to in England. Okay, so Puritan New England. Unlike the profit-minded colonists at Jamestown, the Puritans emigrated in order to create a model new society, a city upon a hill. So they wanted to create this colony that could be an example, be exemplary of what life should be like, what a moral life should be like. So the Puritans were English who wanted to purify or reform the Church of England. So in England, they have a national church, which is the Church of England. And so technically, a little backstory about the Church of England. King Henry VIII wanted a divorce, but everyone was Catholic at the time, and the Pope would not grant him a divorce. So he decided to start a new church. I mean, you're king, someone doesn't give you what you want, so let's just start a new church. So essentially, the Church of England was the Catholic Church, because it kept all of the kind of pomp and circumstance of the Catholic Church, kind of followed a lot of the same guidelines. However, you could get a divorce, and it had a new name and a few slightly other differences, but very closely followed a lot of the same traditions of Catholicism. So the Puritans, once the Reformation happens, they feel that the Church of England still represented had too much ties to Catholicism, so they felt it needed to be purified. But they were a minority in England, so because of that, they faced persecution in England, which was the main reason why they came to America. So the Puritans fled England to escape persecution and became known as the Pilgrims. And in 1620, they founded the Plymouth Colony. So this was the second permanent English colony in North America. In September of 1630, John Winthrop established the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so this colony would be another predominantly Puritan colony, and eventually the Plymouth Colony would be incorporated into the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they were able to develop a system of self-government and had a close relationship between the government and the Puritan Church. All adult males who belonged to the Puritan Church could vote. So we start to see examples of kind of this idea of self-government, some democratic elements within their system of government as well. Puritan laws criminalized such sins as drunkenness, swearing, theft, and idleness. So we see a lot of Puritan laws influencing the government. So again, that close relationship between church and state. And people could be punished for not following Puritan law to the highest extent. So unlike the settlers in Virginia, the Puritans generally traveled with their entire family. So again, a completely different element. They're coming here to escape persecution. They're bringing their wives and their children, and they're trying to set up a completely different type of colony. And then again, going back to that idea of a city upon a hill. So they're leaving England. They don't want the persecution. They want to come to America and be an example for others. So here we have a map of the New England area. So right now we're talking about Massachusetts. So you see right here, Plymouth is where the Pilgrims came in 1620. Boston, 1630, where John Winthrop landed. And so that will eventually become Massachusetts. The next slide will be talking about Rhode Island and how Rhode Island gets founded. So dissent in the Puritan community. So not everyone was in complete agreement with how the Puritans were running the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they escaped England. They didn't want persecution for being different with their religious beliefs. But yet when they came here, if people didn't share their Puritan beliefs, then they did the same thing. Those people were punished. So they didn't practice the religious toleration that they wanted for themselves. So Roger Williams expressed two controversial views. First, he declared that the English settlers had no rightful claim to the land unless they purchased it from Native Americans. So again, very, kind of forward thinking for someone back then. He recognizes that this land belongs to them. We just can't come here and claim it for ourselves. We need to negotiate with them. Second, he declared that government officials had no business punishing settlers for their religious beliefs. So these views outraged the general court, and Williams was going to be arrested and sent back to England. But before that happened, he fled Massachusetts and negotiated with a local tribe to set up a new colony, Rhode Island. So this colony would guarantee separation of church and state, meaning that the church laws would not influence the government laws. That's what that separation is. Whereas in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Puritan law was also the law. And introducing the idea of religious freedom. People can worship freely without fear of persecution, being arrested, any type of punishment. Anne Hutchinson was also banished by Puritan leaders. She believed that worshipers did not need the church or its ministers to interpret the Bible for them. So if people can do that by themselves, it takes away power from church leaders that they wanted to kind of hold on to. So for this idea, again, being controversial, they wanted to have her punished, arrested, but she decided to leave as well. She went to Rhode Island. So let's stop and think. How did life in Jamestown differ than the life in Massachusetts Bay Colony? So we can see that their motivations were different. One was more business and profit minded, where the other was, we're fleeing religious persecution, we want to establish a new colony. And then those lead us to these differences. But yet they still had their own issues, where even with a Puritan colony, yes, they had good intentions to establish it. They didn't necessarily follow through with religious toleration and being accepting of people. And that led to some dissent within their group as well. Settlement of the Middle Colonies. William Penn was granted a land charter in the Americas by King Charles II of England. This colony, Pennsylvania, would have a government run by the Quaker principles of equality, cooperation, and religious toleration. He guaranteed every adult male settler 50 acres of land and the right to vote. Penn's plan for government called for a representative assembly and freedom of religion. So again, we're starting to see these elements of kind of democracy and what we will eventually incorporate into our Constitution. Penn wanted his colonists to treat the native people fairly, so he regulated trade between them and provided a court composed of both colonists and Native Americans to settle any differences. And they were able to live conflict-free. So people that wanted to work with the Native Americans, people that had acknowledged their existence and the fact that they were not a people to be taken over and told what to do, but again, recognizing them as a people who had value and who were of equal status. They were able to find ways to work with each other. If colonists saw them as just a people to be conquered and to have things taken from them, then of course they're going to have conflict. So, depending on the viewpoints of the colonists, it really impacted their relationship with the natives around them. In order for his colony to be profitable, Penn needed to attract settlers, farmers, builders, traders, and so many came from Western Europe, Germany, France, the Netherlands. And so we start to see, like when you think about Pennsylvania, you do see kind of a higher population of people of Germanic descent, French descent, from the Dutch area. In that area, you still have the Amish, and some people call them, Dutch country, Dutch land over there. So you still see those kinds of influences from these early settlers. The 13 colonies. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, other British colonies in North America would be founded. Maryland was established as a Catholic colony and became famous for its religious freedom. Georgia was established as a colony to be a safe haven for those imprisoned for debt. North and South Carolina was awarded to a group of key supporters of King Charles II. So here's a map of the 13 colonies that we are looking at. And one thing you may notice is Florida down here, not considered part of the 13 colonies because Florida at this time was still under Spanish control. And so here in this chart, you'll need this chart for your activity, the coming to the colonies, because it asks you to kind of compare and contrast the different colonies. And so this gives you an idea of kind of what the different colonies and their regions were known for. So in New England, they're known more for shipping and fishing, and they had lots of great trees. In the middle colonies, known more for their farming. They had great farmland. And then the southern colonies have a lot of these cash crops like tobacco that is going to be grown. Later on, we'll see cotton becoming very popular in the South as a cash crop. So we are done with the notes for today. Oh, hold on. One last slide. So let's stop and think. What are some themes that we see in these early colonies that will eventually be incorporated into the America we know? So within the Massachusetts Bay Colony, we started to see early elements of democracy where all the males could vote. So again, they're voting for their officials. We start to see the idea of the separation of church and state with Rhode Island. Also the idea of religious freedom. And so we start to see all these elements in different areas. And so when the revolution starts and you have the Constitutional Convention, we start to see where all these ideas are coming from. So they're kind of like picking and choosing what they want to put into our new Constitution to establish our new American government. So now the notes are done. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me or send me a remind message.